Have you ever wondered why some people seem trapped in the same cycle of fear, confusion, and spiritual exhaustion, no matter how hard they pray? Imagine discovering that an ancient passage of Scripture contains truths so powerful that they expose every deception darkness depends on. Today, we will explore 4 verses from the Book of Ezekiel that reveal God's authority over lies, false prophets, and spiritual manipulation. These verses are not magical formulas. They are reminders of God's truth, His justice, and His call to remain faithful. If you truly understand their meaning, fear begins to lose its grip, and your mind becomes a place that deception can no longer control. Before we speak about the verses themselves, we must first understand where every real battle begins. Most people assume that if something dark enters their life, it starts somewhere outside of them, with another person, an event, or an unseen force. But long before circumstances begin to change, something has already shifted within the mind. Fear is rarely the result of the battle. More often, it is the invitation that allows the battle to grow. When fear settles into the heart unchecked, it begins to shape perception. It convinces you that every coincidence is a threat, every setback is a curse, and every uncertainty is proof that you have been abandoned. The mind becomes a prison long before the body ever feels confined. Think about this carefully. A person who is constantly afraid no longer sees reality as it is. They see reality through the lens of anxiety. They begin to expect failure before taking action. They expect betrayal before trust is even tested. They expect darkness before they have looked for light. This is how deception gains influence, not because it is overwhelmingly powerful, but because the mind has stopped questioning the stories fear keeps telling. This is why discipline of the mind is one of the greatest forms of spiritual protection. A restless mind can be manipulated. A panicked mind can be persuaded to believe almost anything. But a quiet, disciplined mind becomes difficult to deceive. It pauses before reacting. It observes before judging. It asks whether a thought is rooted in truth or merely in emotion. That single pause has tremendous power because it prevents fear from becoming your master. Many people spend enormous energy searching for external solutions while neglecting the condition of their inner world. They want immediate answers for every uncertainty, yet they rarely ask whether their own thoughts are serving truth or feeding anxiety. If your thoughts are undisciplined, even good circumstances will not bring peace. But when your mind is grounded in truth, even difficult seasons cannot steal your stability. This is why Scripture repeatedly calls people back to wisdom rather than panic. God does not lead His people by confusion. He does not invite them into endless suspicion or obsessive fear. He calls them to discernment. Discernment is not living in constant doubt. It is the ability to recognize truth without becoming consumed by fear. There is a profound difference between being aware and being afraid. Awareness sharpens your vision. Fear clouds it. Those who seek to manipulate others often understand this principle. They know that an afraid person is easier to control than a peaceful one. Fear causes people to surrender their judgment, to cling to anyone promising certainty, and to accept comforting lies instead of difficult truth. But the moment you refuse to let fear govern your thinking, much of that influence begins to disappear. Your decisions become clearer. Your spirit becomes steadier. Your heart becomes less vulnerable to every frightening voice that demands your attention. This is why the journey toward freedom always begins within. Before any chain is broken outwardly, something must awaken inwardly. The mind must return to stillness, the heart must return to truth, and the soul must remember that peace is stronger than panic. Only then are you prepared to recognize the warnings that Ezekiel was called to reveal. Now that the mind has become still enough to see clearly, we are ready to understand why the first passage in Ezekiel carries such weight. The warning is not directed first at obvious evil. It is directed at false voices, those who claim to speak with authority while leading people away from truth. This is one of the oldest dangers in human history because deception rarely announces itself as deception. It often arrives wearing the clothing of wisdom, confidence, and even spirituality. It tells people exactly what they want to hear, while quietly leading them away from what they truly need to hear. In the book of Ezekiel, God confronts those who speak in his name without his authority. They create messages from their own imagination, presenting them as divine truth. They promise peace where there is no peace. They offer certainty where there is only illusion. This is not merely an ancient problem. It is a timeless one. Even today, people are surrounded by countless voices competing for their attention. Some promise instant success. Others promise secret knowledge, guaranteed protection, or effortless answers to life's deepest struggles. But truth is rarely loud. It is rarely dramatic. It does not manipulate emotions to gain followers. It stands quietly, patiently, inviting those who are willing to seek it with humility. This is why discernment is one of the greatest forms of wisdom you can develop. Discernment asks difficult questions. It does not reject something simply because it is unfamiliar, nor does it accept something simply because it is popular. It patiently examines whether the message produces fear or faith, confusion or clarity, pride or humility. Truth has a remarkable quality. It may challenge you, but it will never enslave you. It may expose your weaknesses, but it always points toward growth and restoration. Those who seek to manipulate understand the power of certainty. They know that people who are frightened are eager for someone to tell them exactly what to think. Fear makes people vulnerable to confident voices, even when those voices lack wisdom. This is why the first protection against deception is not extraordinary knowledge. It is a heart that values truth more than comfort. If you only seek messages that make you feel safe, you may overlook the message that could truly transform you. Consider how often people confuse emotional excitement with spiritual conviction. A dramatic experience can move the emotions, but emotions alone are not reliable guides. They rise and fall like waves upon the sea. Wisdom, however, remains steady. It is built upon principles rather than feelings. A disciplined mind does not chase every new claim or every alarming prediction. It remains anchored in what is enduring, allowing truth to reveal itself over time rather than demanding immediate certainty. The warning in Ezekiel is therefore not an invitation to become suspicious of everyone. It is an invitation to become rooted in truth so deeply that falsehood becomes easier to recognize. The more familiar you become with what is genuine, the less attractive imitation appears. A person who studies light does not spend every moment fearing darkness. Instead, they carry the light wherever they go, and by its presence, deception is naturally exposed. This is the quiet strength that no manipulation can overcome, and it prepares us to understand the next truth. Ezekiel reveals about the hidden traps that seek to capture the soul. Once you learn to recognize false voices, you begin to notice something even more subtle. Deception is not satisfied with merely influencing your thoughts. Its deeper purpose is to keep you trapped. This is where the next passage in Ezekiel becomes so powerful. God speaks of those who ensnare people, using the image of nets and traps to describe spiritual manipulation. It is a striking picture because a trap does not rely on strength. It relies on ignorance. The animal caught in a net is not defeated because it is weak. It is defeated because it never saw the net until it was too late. The same principle applies to human life. Most people imagine traps as dramatic events, but the most dangerous traps are often invisible. They are built one small decision at a time. A little compromise becomes a habit becomes a mindset becomes an identity. Before long, a person no longer realizes they are living inside a prison because they have grown accustomed to its walls. Fear is one such trap. Resentment is another. Pride, bitterness, envy, constant comparison, and the need for approval are all forms of bondage that quietly tighten around the soul. They do not arrive overnight. They develop gradually, convincing you that they are protecting you, when, in reality, they are limiting your freedom. Someone who cannot forgive believes they are holding another person accountable, but often they are only carrying a burden that grows heavier with every passing year. Someone who constantly seeks validation believes they are pursuing love, yet they become dependent on the opinions of people who cannot define their worth. This is why Ezekiel's imagery is so profound. The trap is not merely something placed around you. It becomes something you begin to carry within you. And once the prison moves inside your own heart, changing your surroundings alone will never bring freedom. You can change cities, relationships, careers, or routines. But if the inner trap remains untouched, it simply follows you wherever you go. God's promise is not merely to expose these nets, but to tear them apart. That is an important distinction. Exposure is the beginning of freedom, but freedom requires release. Many people can identify what is harming them, yet they continue feeding it. They recognize destructive habits, unhealthy relationships, or fearful thinking, but recognition alone does not transform a life. Truth must be followed by courage. The courage to let go, the courage to walk away, the courage to trust that what God has prepared is greater than what fear insists you must keep. Notice that this process requires responsibility. It is easy to blame every hardship on forces outside ourselves. It is much harder to ask whether our own choices have strengthened the very chains we wish to break. This is not about guilt, it is about honesty. Honest self-examination is one of the greatest acts of spiritual maturity because it allows healing to begin where excuses end. When your heart is honest, you become difficult to imprison. Manipulation loses its grip because you are no longer controlled by fear, pride, or the approval of others. Your peace no longer depends on circumstances. Your confidence no longer depends on human praise. Your direction no longer depends on every opinion that surrounds you. Instead, you begin to walk with quiet certainty, knowing that truth has already broken the strongest net. And when every hidden trap has been exposed, the next lesson becomes clear. Darkness has always depended more on secrecy than on strength. Once the trap has been recognized and the heart begins to walk in greater freedom, another truth from Ezekiel comes into view. The power of manipulation has always depended on remaining hidden. Darkness thrives where people refuse to examine what is shaping their decisions, their desires, and their beliefs. The moment truth shines upon what was concealed, much of its influence begins to fade. This is why God does not merely promise judgment against deception. He promises to expose it. Exposure is one of the greatest acts of mercy, because what is brought into the light can finally be confronted and overcome. Think about how manipulation works in everyday life. It rarely forces itself upon you. Instead, it whispers. It plants a thought, stirs an emotion, and waits for you to build the rest of the story. A single misunderstanding becomes resentment. A moment of disappointment becomes hopelessness. A criticism becomes an identity. Over time, the mind begins to accept these lies as facts. Eventually, people are no longer responding to reality. They are responding to a version of reality that has been quietly distorted. This is why inner honesty is so important. Many people fear looking deeply into themselves because they worry about what they might discover. Yet avoiding the truth never produces peace. It only allows hidden struggles to grow stronger. A person who refuses to acknowledge anger often becomes controlled by it. A person who refuses to admit pride becomes blind to their own limitations. A person who refuses to confront fear begins making every decision according to it. But the one who is willing to stand honestly before God finds something remarkable. They discover that truth does not come to condemn the sincere heart. It comes to restore it. Notice how calmness becomes a form of strength. Manipulation depends on impulsive reactions. It wants you to speak before thinking, to judge before understanding, to fear before discerning. But a disciplined spirit refuses to be rushed. It listens carefully. It observes patiently. It allows wisdom to mature before taking action. This quiet steadiness frustrates every attempt to control the mind because it cannot be pushed by panic or pulled by emotional extremes. There is another lesson hidden within this. Many people believe strength means always fighting, always proving themselves, always responding to every accusation or every challenge. Yet true strength often appears as restraint. Not every insult deserves an answer. Not every rumor requires a defense. Not every conflict needs your participation. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to surrender your peace to someone else's chaos. A person who has mastered themselves cannot easily be manipulated because they are no longer controlled by the reactions of the moment. The verses in Ezekiel remind us that God is not indifferent to deception. He sees every hidden motive, every false promise, every attempt to exploit fear for personal gain. His justice is not confused by appearances. What people hide from one another cannot be hidden from him. This should not fill the faithful with anxiety. It should fill them with confidence. You do not need to expose every deception by your own strength. Your responsibility is to remain rooted in truth, to cultivate integrity, and to refuse to participate in what you know is false. When you live this way, your very life becomes a testimony that light is stronger than darkness. As this understanding settles into your heart, you begin to realize that lasting security has never depended on knowing every hidden threat. It has always depended on remaining close to the one from whom nothing can be hidden. And that is where the next truth in Ezekiel reveals the deepest source of confidence. After seeing how God exposes false voices, tears apart hidden traps, and brings manipulation into the light, there is one question that naturally remains. What happens to the person who chooses to remain faithful? This is where the message of Ezekiel becomes deeply reassuring. Throughout the book, God's concern is not only with confronting deception, but with preserving those who refuse to abandon truth. His desire has always been to gather, restore, and strengthen those who keep their hearts anchored in Him. Even when the world around them is filled with confusion, faithfulness is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as an emotion that rises and falls depending on circumstances. But true faithfulness is not measured by how you feel on your best day. It is revealed by what you choose on your hardest day. Anyone can speak confidently when life is easy. Anyone can trust when every prayer seems immediately answered. But the deeper kind of faith is formed when the road becomes uncertain, and yet the heart refuses to surrender to despair. That kind of faith cannot be manufactured overnight. It is built through daily decisions, quiet obedience, and a willingness to keep walking even when the destination is not yet visible. This is why fear and faith move in opposite directions. Fear constantly asks, what if everything goes wrong? Faith asks, what if God remains exactly who He has always been? Fear measures possibilities according to human weakness. Faith measures them according to God's unchanging character. The circumstances may be identical, but the perspective transforms everything. One person sees only obstacles. Another sees an opportunity to trust more deeply. The difference is not the size of the challenge. It is the condition of the heart facing it. There is also a profound freedom that comes with remaining faithful. When your confidence rests in God rather than in changing circumstances, you are no longer easily shaken by every rumor, every setback, or every frightening prediction. You stop living as though your peace depends on controlling the future. Instead, you begin to understand that peace comes from knowing the one who already stands beyond the future. This does not mean life becomes free of difficulty. It means difficulty no longer has permission to define you. Many people spend their lives searching for perfect security. They believe that if they could eliminate every possible threat, every uncertainty, and every risk, then they would finally have peace. But such a day never comes. New challenges always appear. New questions always arise. If your peace depends upon the absence of problems, then peace will always remain temporary. Yet if your peace is rooted in God's presence, then even in the middle of uncertainty, something within you remains steady. Consider a tree growing beside a river. Storms will come. Strong winds will bend its branches. Seasons of drought may arrive. Yet its roots continue drawing from a source hidden beneath the surface. Those who only look at the branches may assume the tree is struggling, but they cannot see what sustains it. In much the same way, a faithful person is nourished by something the world cannot always recognize. Their strength is not borrowed from public approval, favorable circumstances, or constant success. It comes from remaining connected to the one who never changes. This is one of the greatest reasons deception ultimately fails. It depends upon instability. It feeds upon panic, confusion, impatience, and doubt. But a heart that has learned to trust God consistently becomes increasingly difficult to manipulate. Lies lose their attraction because truth has become more satisfying. Fear loses its influence because confidence has found a stronger foundation. The soul no longer rushes toward every dramatic claim because it has learned the quiet strength of waiting upon God. Ezekiel's message reminds us that God is not searching for perfect people. He is searching for faithful hearts. Hearts that are willing to listen, willing to repent, willing to grow, and willing to stand firm when truth becomes unpopular. Such people may not always appear powerful in the eyes of the world, but they possess something far greater. They carry an inner stability that cannot be purchased, threatened, or stolen. And when faithfulness becomes your foundation, you discover that the safest place has never been the absence of trials. It has always been the presence of God. As we come to the end of this journey, notice that everything we have explored leads to one simple conclusion. The greatest protection is not found in living with constant suspicion. It is not found in chasing secret knowledge, collecting rituals, or becoming consumed with fear about unseen forces. The greatest protection is found in becoming the kind of person who cannot easily be deceived. This is the deeper wisdom hidden throughout Ezekiel's message. God was never merely teaching people how to recognize darkness. He was teaching them how to remain so firmly rooted in truth that darkness would lose its influence over their lives. Think about the 4 lessons we have reflected on. We began by understanding that the battlefield starts in the mind. Then we learned that false voices must be tested rather than blindly accepted. After that, we saw how hidden traps are broken only when they are exposed by truth. Finally, we discovered that faithfulness creates a stability no external force can easily shake. These are not separate ideas. They are connected like stones forming a path. Miss one step and the journey becomes unstable. Walk them together and they become a way of life. The world encourages people to react quickly. News spreads instantly. Opinions multiply by the second. Fear travels faster than wisdom because fear demands immediate attention. But wisdom moves differently. It is patient. It listens before speaking. It observes before judging. It remains steady while everything around it appears uncertain. This kind of inner discipline is becoming increasingly rare. Yet it is exactly what every sincere seeker of truth must cultivate. There will always be people who profit from fear. Some will exaggerate dangers to gain influence. Others will offer dramatic solutions to problems they themselves have magnified. This has happened throughout history, and it continues today. But remember this carefully. The more your heart becomes anchored in truth, the less attractive manipulation becomes. A person who knows who they are in God cannot easily be controlled by threats, flattery, or intimidation. They are no longer desperate for approval because their identity rests on something far deeper than human opinion. This is why spiritual maturity is not measured by how much information you possess. It is measured by the quality of your character. Knowledge without humility often produces pride. Knowledge without wisdom can produce anxiety. But truth that transforms the heart produces peace. It teaches patience instead of panic, compassion instead of bitterness, courage instead of fear, integrity instead of compromise. These are the qualities that quietly reshape a person's entire life. Do not spend your days searching for signs of darkness everywhere you look. Instead, spend your days strengthening the light within you. A room does not become bright because it studies the darkness. It becomes bright because someone lights a lamp. In the same way, your life becomes a source of hope, not because you become obsessed with evil, but because you become committed to truth, kindness, discipline, and unwavering faith. When these qualities grow within you, many of the fears that once dominated your thinking begin to disappear on their own. Remember that every choice matters. Every honest decision strengthens your character. Every act of forgiveness weakens resentment. Every moment of self-control weakens impulse. Every decision to trust God instead of fear builds another layer of inner resilience. These changes may seem small when viewed individually, but over time they shape a life that cannot easily be shaken by confusion or deception. The message of Ezekiel was never intended to leave people afraid. It was intended to awaken them, to remind them that God sees what human eyes cannot, that He exposes what others attempt to conceal, that He calls His people not into panic but into faithfulness, and that His truth remains unchanged regardless of how uncertain the world becomes. So leave here with a quiet confidence. Guard your mind with truth. Test every voice with wisdom. Walk away from every hidden trap. Remain faithful in every season. and let your life become a reflection of the light that no darkness can overcome.